Hey everyone, Ron here, and I hope you enjoyed last week's episode, which was part one of our interview with Tim Chubb. Tim comes back this episode, and we think you're going to really enjoy it. This episode does get a little bit longer than our normal, but there was a lot of great content, so we hope that you will enjoy it. But that all being the case, one thing that we did want to quickly touch on is there is some discussion about financial investments, and similar to the disclaimer we put in last week's episode, I will give that quick reading. All information discussed here, including all ideas, opinions, views, predictions, forecasts, commentary, suggestions, or stock picks, expressed or implied herein, are for informational, entertainment, and educational purposes only, and should not be construed as personal investment advice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And welcome to episode 14.
Wait a second.
Wait. Did we do that one?
We already did 14. We have to take a new number.
Oh, wait. Yeah, because this is part 2 with Tim Chubb. So,
Yeah.
Wait, so can this be 14B? 14B?
No. We're going to have so many people writing us horrible emails about how upset they are that we've broken order. We have to keep decorum, Alex. I mean, this is an amateur hour. This is legit stuff. This is Between Two Studs. This is episode 15. It's a part 2, but it's 15.
We're wow. So we're making this 15.
We're into 15 now.
Because for us, the episodes that end in 0s and 5s are big deals.
They are. They're always big deals.
I mean, for 10, we did the recap episode. Who knows what we're going to do for 20? But 15, here we are with Tim Chubb part 2.
We're here. We're ready.
And you know what? No one else I'd rather have on as our guest for episode 14 and 15.
So welcome back, Tim.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I'm honored. I'm glad to be 15.
14 and 15.
So I know in episode 14, we were certainly talking a lot about stock, and we're talking in general. I think the theme of these 2 episodes has certainly been about some of the different, more unusual investment opportunities that are out there, especially with your background as a CIO. One thing that we've kind of started to touch on, but I think that really made sense to kind of break out into this episode, is talking about cryptocurrencies. You know, it's something where Alex and I, fortunately, we've got in pretty early, as we were discussing before the show. But for our listeners, could you kind of give us a background on what cryptocurrencies are, if it's really just magic internet money, or if there actually is some value to it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I sometimes I joke, sometimes people call certain stocks, their pet rock. I call my internet beans that I own. But in all seriousness, I think, it's good to maybe start with a quick history of blockchain. And so, which I think is really important, because I feel like the world talks about Bitcoin and the dreams that they have for it. And if you replace the word Bitcoin with blockchain, it would be more accurate. And so, Bitcoin came out, late 2000s. It was this idea to create this, decentralized money system. And in the 2 cases were both sort of payments and then a store of value, much like gold is a store of value today. But the problem is with Bitcoin, anyway, at least in my opinion, is while it could be a store of value like gold, because there's only a certain amount of Bitcoins that will ever exist, much like there's not an infinite amount of resources for gold, then it becomes a question of payments. And I think that's sort of been the libertarian dream, where this, world's, the global economies, you just say, hey, Bitcoin's it, and everybody's just going to live and use Bitcoin as their currency. And so after that, 2015 comes along, and there's this blockchain protocol called Ethereum that basically builds on this core architecture and then generalizes it. And so I think you can think of you can think of Bitcoin, you can think of Ethereum, you can think of any blockchain protocol as this basically a computer, and that computer can store things and run code, and the code can operate on those things that the protocol says is true. Just like a specific, application that a computer would run, and that application might be store payments or, store value or payments. And so, Ethereum basically took the concept of Bitcoin, took it to the next level, said, okay, we're going to generalize it. Anything you can do, run it on this program, build it on this protocol, and build it on the Ethereum computer. And so blockchain, I think at its core solves for trust in its truest definition. And ultimately, when you think about where there's issues with, I think, the global financial system, much like we were talking about earlier when it came to settlement of stock trades, things are not instantaneous and they also cost money. And you have to trust that there's a person on the other side of that transaction that is ultimately a good person and they're good for what they say that they are, which, if you're selling something, it's money. And if you're buying something, it's goods. And so, ultimately, I think these computers can really solve the problems for trust within, I think, the financial system. And, anybody can create a coin or an asset. I mean, you can build a stud coin on, a blockchain protocol.
Oh, we already have.
Good. Yep. and I'm sure, just like any other, blockchain protocol, it can't be overridden by developers.
Well, and there's only 2 stud coins. That's it. 2 brothers.
Perfect. So then, the value, it's going to be a function of the scarcity of the asset, of which there's 2.
Well,
right.
And I think that's for those who are not knowledgeable about crypto. I'm glad you talked about the scarcity. In the case of Bitcoin, there's only ever going to be 21 million in totality. And I think that's significant. We are not a political show, but you look at the last 12 months, whatever your take is, it doesn't matter about these stimulus packages. We've literally printed about $5 trillion when you add them all in. And you think about it, and I'm not an economist. I am not someone with your knowledge or expertise, Tim. But as someone who knows a little bit, I think to myself, well, we've just thrown $5 trillion into the orbit, into the world. We just literally printed it and made it up out of thin air. Aren't there concerns about that?
There are, and I think, but ultimately, I think a lot of the comment that gold bugs make, which I think is very similar to Bitcoin bugs, is that the dollar is not backed by anything, and they hearken to the 70s when we came off the gold standard under Nixon and said, okay, after we went off the gold standard, every dollar is not backed by anything. I would argue that's absolutely false. It's backed by something: the American taxpayer, the American economy at $20 trillion. And so having an asset like Bitcoin or gold or something that has scarcity to it and an infinite amount in its creation ultimately holds value because and have some comfort in the protocol that says this is a truth. We cannot update it as a developer. There is only 21 million Bitcoins that exist. And so unlike a company, you can't change its mind. You can't change the code. Ultimately, nefarious people can't get involved and try to manipulate it for their own good. And I definitely think there's some issues with Bitcoin as far as like how decentralized it is. And, they say that there's very few people who control a large amount of it. So maybe, stud coin is a function of that. And it's really you two that
we have a monopoly on stud coin.
Yeah, absolutely. But, ultimately, you don't have to trust a person anymore with blockchain protocols. You just have to trust the computer, right? And where I'm calling it the computer, but it's the blockchain protocol as a metaphor. And so all you have to do is trust that blockchain protocol that the person on the other end is going to do what they say that they're going to do. And, it sort of acts as this escrow in many ways, especially for digital transactions, that I think creates a massive amount of utility and a massive amount of more trust in the financial system ultimately.
It's interesting when Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies first started coming on the market, and Ron turned me on to it. And, I kind of dabbled a little bit, and it was more just curiosity. It was less about investment, and it was more about curiosity and kind of appealing to my libertarian philosophy, right? Not just politically, but in life. And the natural thing that always came up is people thought either this is complete garbage or it is only used for nefarious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say? Maybe this is a question for both you and Ron. What do you say when people say that?
I think I defer to Ron, first on that one.
I think what's kind of tough with Bitcoin and currency in general is there's definitely a lot of, I think, shade that kind of got thrown on it just because of fear or maybe misunderstandings about it. I think for most people early on, it was kind of perceived as, okay, magic internet money, one. I think number two, it was like there was the Silk Road that was going on at the time. So for a lot of people, it was like, cool, I have an anonymized, or they thought anonymized, payment system where I could buy nefarious goods and not have to deal with some of the challenges that you normally have. Like, for instance, if I wanted to give a money order to somebody in another country, there's definitely some tie-ins. On the other hand, if you've got just some cryptocurrency, it's not explicitly tied to your bank account normally. So it was very easy for people to kind of use it as it's used for nefarious purposes. I think what's kind of interesting is I think that narrative has kind of disappeared. And I think one of the funny parts with that has been, I think they've done studies, and I want to say like something like a third of all American dollars are unfortunately contaminated with like some degree of cocaine, which should tell you about how nefarious the U.S. dollar is.
Well, that was
in
always
terms of its usage.
That was always my response. I always said, the currency that's probably used the most illicitly is the U.S. dollar.
Right. So it's funny because it's transitioned away from, it's nefarious to, it uses stupid amounts of power and that's killing the planet, which I'm not completely sure I agree with, but, to each their own.
But that is a question people are talking about now. Even Elon Musk, who's a big backer of Bitcoin, has tremendous concerns about the electrical requirements to fund the cryptocurrency world that we're in. Is there potential, because I don't know the answer to this, is there potential for Bitcoin to, over time, become more efficient in terms of electrical use? Or is this an inevitability that was built when cryptocurrency was established, 15 years ago?
I guess in my opinion, when it comes to the talk about the electricity consumption as far as making the payments and the efficiency of the protocol, ultimately you have to ask yourself, well, yes, it consumes electricity, but how does it compare to the electricity expended by the current financial system, right? So how much does, in electricity consumption, as far as, me placing a trade or us having a conversation, in a podcast over the internet. And so I think when you look at it in those terms, I don't necessarily think that, Bitcoin is as costly as you may think. However, in my opinion, I think Bitcoin is an inefficient blockchain protocol as it relates to transactions. I think store of value is more of the investment thesis there, as much as payments has become, again, that libertarian dream. I don't think the Bitcoin blockchain protocol is where you build a payment system off of. I think it's something else. I've got my own views on that, and Ethereum, I think, is one of those protocols that potentially could solve that problem. I'm not invested in Ethereum, and so I guess that tells you a little bit about how I think about that. But there are some other exciting opportunities out there that I think could maybe resolve the issue from a payments perspective.
Chubb, I'm like actually completely in agreement with you. Whether or not that's a surprise, I don't know. But yeah, the way I kind of see it is I'm completely in agreement with the theory that, while it's kind of pointed out, hey, look at how much money this is costing, I think there's also a lot of cost that is not maybe transparent to most people when they think about some of the current financial system things. For instance, we talked about it, I think, pre-show. One of the things that I've loved about Bitcoin is if I wanted to send $5,000 to China right now, if I did it through a SWIFT transfer, if I did it through a MoneyGram, if I did it through any of the conventional means, it's going to take me 4 to 5 days for that to go through. I'm probably going to have to pay about $50 for that to go through. And it's not a very smart, it's something that it takes some time. I think the other challenge that I have, that I see benefit with Bitcoin and other cryptos, is that you don't have the chargebacks that you would have with the current system. So somebody gets your credit card, they use it to buy something. There's a cost associated with, if you're a business owner, I in good faith, I assume that somebody was giving me a legit credit card number. I sent them this good, and now I'm unable to recover my money because it got basically sent back. So I think that there's a lot of costs associated with the current system. Even just think about like the amount of staff that people are using to kind of, hey, I had a problem with my credit card, I had a problem with my bank account. There's thousands of people that are doing that for a living. On the other hand, when you use blockchain technology correctly, it's very cut and dry. There's no back and forth that goes on. And when it comes to costs, I think that that's something that is certainly a significant factor. When you have that trustless system working as it should, yeah, you're paying for it in energy. Where that kind of ends up long term, I don't know, because I think one of the other challenging factors that could be a problem is, what about quantum computing? Assuming like quantum computing gets to the point where it's energy efficient, but maybe it's a extremely expensive, type of computational asset, there may only be certain people that control it. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there is going to be some limitations in general, but there's limitations to any type of financial system long term.
I think I'd liken it to really two, different things. One is solar. Like solar has been the next biggest things for 30 years now. Why hasn't it happened? It was too costly to buy cells, and the solar panels were too costly. It couldn't reach mass adoption and critical mass until the price went down. I think the same thing exists as it relates to payments within the world of crypto assets. And so, there are alternatives to Bitcoin that are much more efficient, that aren't going to consume as much energy, that are going to be much less costly. And it's also very similar to the way that I think, BlackBerry was pre-iPhone 2004, 2005, where, everybody loved BlackBerry Messenger, and SMS text messages cost 10 cents. And you had to worry about sending stuff cross network, and there was all these roaming charges, and we have all these different networks and banking systems, and blockchain decentralization, I think, ultimately solves all those problems. And so, while a lot of people have said, and I think Mark Cuban was one of them, like, hey, this is Internet 2.0. I don't know if I would go that far, but what we've experienced in innovation since iPhone to now, I think is what happens in digital payments over the next 15 years.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Chubb, because I'm sure you've seen this, but there's been rumors that the Biden administration, as well as the Federal Reserve, have looked into or discussed the idea of at some point converting the US dollar into cryptocurrency. My question for both of you is one, is that even feasible? Number two, is that a good thing? Does it more or less just legitimize the fact that cryptocurrency is a viable, like, are they validating that this is something that they've been sort of fighting behind the scenes for a while, and now they're giving even more validation that yes, this is the future?
I mean, I think one of the challenging parts, and this is something I want to say the government of Canada actually looked at it pretty early on, is that I think one of the things that digital currencies, cryptocurrencies have in general, is that there's a sense of scarcity. So where that gets a little bit tough is, okay, think about the recent stimulus, right? And as we mentioned, we don't really get political on this show, but I think one of the tough challenges that you have as a politician is, all right, we want to inject money into our system. How do you do that? Well, we have to create it. So some of that does come into, something that I think I was going to talk about earlier, but it's a tough challenge. There's different views of economics, and one of the views of economics is that fundamentally we are all doing various types of work. It adds value, and even though there may be a scarce amount of gold or whatever we want to use, shells or example, you have to account for the fact that there is work being continually added to the system. And that's where inflation, I think, does kind of work, because as much as a lot of people view inflation as a completely bad thing, we are all contributing and adding value. So there has to be some way to account for that. And I think that's where there's maybe an opportunity for a bit of a mix of that with a hybrid, where you can say, yep, we're going to maybe inflate our currency a little bit to kind of make for trying to keep things good and keep the system flowing, but it's maybe not going to be quite as stringent as a store of value as like Bitcoin is. What do you think, Chubb?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I never really thought of it that way, because I think one of the most common questions and concepts that's misunderstood but simple answers is inflation, especially right now, because we look back to the last 12 months, and if you look at a chart of M2 money supply, which I know is going like econ 202, probably maybe 101, but ultimately this concept of how much physical fiat currencies in existence within checking accounts, savings accounts, money market funds, etc. the amount that it has existed, or the amount in existence, 25% of it was not there in February of 2020.
That's insane.
That's how much money was printed. So you're seeing inflation really start to pick up. Now, the most recent inflation reading was a bit of a head scratcher, because you're starting to see like oil and lumber and a lot of other commodities move up in value. Part of that is demand driven, because the demand for these goods, or commodities, is growing because the economy is starting to normalize and get back on track. But on the other hand, there's still massive amounts of supply issues on the other hand in the denominator that are causing problems, because we're still in this pandemic. And you can't get lumber produced to the level that it was once before because of some of the restrictions related to distancing and whatnot. And so, inflation inherently, a little bit of it is good, because ultimately it means, going back to time value of money, I'll bring it all home. If you think that your dollar today is going to be more valuable than in the future, then you'll spend that dollar today on something. And ultimately, if you expect your dollar to be worth less in the future, you're going to delay that purchase until it's cheaper, which is deflationary, disinflationary, and inherently bad for the economy, which means no one spends money. If we don't have inflation, it means people aren't spending money to a large degree, at least on the denominator side of things, or the numerator side of things. And I think some inflation is good inflation, which is why 2% has been the target of the Federal Reserve basically for the better part of the last 40 years, and not recently announced until 20, I'd say even 10 years ago. It wasn't even like this sort of agreed upon metric. So anyway.
I think this is really interesting, especially when you're looking at long-term investment opportunities and strategies. I think our generation, the late 20s, early 30s, and I know Ron is in the mid 30s, but that generation, we understand that realistically, retirement is very different than previous generations. There's no pensions. Right, we're relying strictly on our own personal investments, which could be things like cryptocurrencies, but also the thing that everyone always invests in is 401ks, if your company offers something like that. One thing I'd love you to touch on, Tim, if you're open to it, and it's because I'm just genuinely curious. I contribute to my 401ks, right, because my company offers it, and I feel good about the investment that I'm putting in. But I do wonder that when you look at the history of 401ks, they really didn't get started until the 70s or 80s. All of a sudden you have this population, aka our parents' generation, that in the next 10 to 15 years are going to be withdrawing a ton. They're going to be selling so much. How is that going to impact the stock market?
I think it's a really good question. I actually never thought of it that way before. And I think one of the things we talk a lot about is how demographics ultimately impact the economy and the financial markets. And I think it's something that, you have to think about, I guess, on the other hand, as the largest generation that our country has ever seen, I guess, reach retirement. It's sort of a barbell, right? You have the baby boomers who, again, the most populous generation until the millennials had come along. And they are no longer in their peak, earning and spending years. Baby boomers, for the most part, they're starting to retire, starting to spend less, obviously earning less as a result of it. And so the heart of our sort of the demographically within our country is Gen X, who is now in their peak earning and spending years, as their children are typically old enough for college, and again, all these sorts of things that cost a lot of money. I call it, when economists talk about household formation years, it's basically another word for or phrase for having a bunch of kids, buying a home, and filling up with a bunch of junk, and then paying for college. And obviously, it's very expensive, and ultimately stimulates the economy. And so, right now that's Gen X, and Gen X is relatively small compared to baby boomers versus millennials. And so, what we have coming, and the person who will be allocating the stocks and buying those off of baby boomers as they sell them, is millennials. And they're going to be entering, I think, soon their peak household formation years, having kids, buying houses, filling up with junk, and paying for college, which will also be very stimulative to the economy. But ultimately, those who are selling a market, needs a buyer. And I think it's going to be the 401k contributions to a large extent, or even more generally than that, of really the millennial generation.
I think that's all very insightful and very interesting, but kind of going back to my question, at the end of the day, are stocks inherently overvalued because we are throwing, as a people, we are throwing our money into these stocks because hey, at the end of the day, this is a better long-term investment strategy than putting it in a bank and getting, less than 1% interest. So all of a sudden you have millions of people all at the same time under a short duration of time withdrawing their
Mm-hmm.
401k. I mean, is there going to be a reckoning of sorts at some point?
I think back to the question of, it's this concept of what the Federal Reserve is, what do they do, how do they impact the economy, how do they impact the bond market, and how does it impact stocks? Ultimately, I think is kind of the answer to the question. So the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee that's run by Jerome Powell, our Fed chairman, they set short-term interest rates, and their goal is to have some inflation. Their target is 2%, and this concept of full employment, which means there is very few people who are looking for work. It's somewhere between 3 and 4%, and they'll be happy. And so if you think about supply and demand, if there's few workers looking for work and lots of jobs and the economy is growing, then ultimately it leads to wage growth, which leads to inflation. And so they have this mechanism of short-term interest rates that they can use to sort of cool down the economy from letting inflation overheat. They have not needed to really raise rates a lot within the last 11 years because after iPhone, after '05 to say, global financial crisis, early 2012 sort of time frame, the economy is not growing at its long-term average, at least here in the United States, at 3.5%. And it's because population growth is very low. There's few millennials that are having kids yet because household formation has been delayed for much of that generation. And then productivity growth has been really low. It's the whole Moore's Law thing, just like stacking chips on top of one another. We haven't had this like crazy productivity breakthrough within the last 10, 15 years. Maybe blockchain protocols is that. Maybe it's 5G. Maybe it's artificial intelligence, machine learning. I could go on and on with the themes and narratives. And so I guess to answer your question, if the economy is not growing, the Fed doesn't need to raise interest rates. And getting back to the initial answer, I am going to feel a lot more comfortable paying for a dollar of earnings of a stock when interest rates are low. The Fed keeps rates low to help stimulate the economy and get it back on its feet. And so there's a reason why multiples for stocks are moving higher, or in other words, the valuation of the price you would pay for it, P over E, price over earnings per share. That is more. It can be, I guess, more appealing when rates are low versus when rates are much higher. You're not going to pay that multiple or price for a stock. So I guess maybe this is the big, maybe not a big brain, but to bring it all home. Guess what? Millennials are entering that phase of their life. Guess what? Innovation's coming soon. Guess what? I think the economy is really going to grow in a meaningful way in this next cycle, but it may be maybe a year to 3 out. So
fair. I have one last question. I think there's a lot of people who are listening who are around my age, and I know for me, I'm getting to that point now. I look at my wife and I realize we want to have a family someday, and we are thinking about retirement and savings and long-term planning. One of the things, in addition to 401ks, I think a lot of people look at their nest egg is their home, right? Buying a home. And of course, up until 2008, that was recession proof, right? Like everyone knew, of course, homes, mortgages, that's never going anywhere, right? There's that is a continuation in increasing in valuation. One question I have for you, because you mentioned this during your explanation of my previous question, you said, and it's true, the population of this country is not particularly growing. Last I looked, the only reason it's actually increasing at all is through immigration. So we're growing at very small margins, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but not only are people having smaller families, but they're having less children, right? I mean, that's what I'm getting at. So people are having less children. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are buying these McMansions out in the suburbs of beautiful cities and saying, well, this is my nest egg, right? Like I might not have much money in retirement. I might not have much money in a 401k, but I have this beautiful 4,000 or 5,000 square foot home. And when I retire in 20 years, this is where I'm going to make all my money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in, is that viable? Because as families get smaller, is there going to be the demand? in 20 years for people to want 4,000 or 5,000 square foot mansions out in the suburbs because, hey, I only have one kid. I only have two kids. I might have 0 kids. So are all of a sudden, are we going to run into a point where we have too much of a supply of these beautiful homes, but not enough demand?
I think when it comes to the supply and demand dynamics within the suburbs, we're in a period where things are going to be changing quite significantly. And while people aren't having more children, they also are working from home. And so the real estate that you need at the office and the real estate you needed at home are now combined. And so I think like ultimately people will want more space and be in the suburbs. They have a space to work from home and a space for their kids to have fun and play. And those two things not to be, too much of a problem. So 5 years ago, if you asked me that question, I wouldn't have said that answer. But I think as work from home continues to improve or grow, I should say, as far as, adoption across, the American worker, I think ultimately that leads to a significant amount of demand outside major cities in suburbs, for those homes in those larger footprints. And then I'd say the second thing there, you'd asked about, sort of like tying a lot of your net worth into your home. If you look at home prices in the United States long term, I think they grow somewhere around 2% per year. That's national average. And so you're going to have, places that no one wants to live in that number. And you're going to have places where tons of people want to live in that number, and different inflation rates, and somewhere in between, or I guess if you take all the numbers and divide them by the amount of numbers, it's an average. I'm sure the median's a bit higher, but nonetheless, the average is about 2%. And so if you look at the stock market, you look at the S&P, and you say that, okay, the earnings of the S&P 500 are going to be dictated by the growth of the U.S. economy. I expect the economy, real GDP, to grow 3 to 4% per year, which is on the high end of how things used to be. Now it's been at 2 and 3%. And I expect inflation to be around 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. Growth of the U.S. economy is 5%. That's how stocks should grow year over year for the foreseeable future. Perhaps, again, past performance isn't a guarantee of future results. There's the disclosure, but okay. So you're saying 5% on the S&P on the low end, and 2% on a home. I rather borrow the money to have my home increase very minimally, and ultimately put more money of my money into the growth of the U.S. economy and the growth of an American company or an international company.
So I really appreciate the response, and I think that's a really good point about how people will be spending more time in their home as the life of being able to work from home continues and probably accelerate even after COVID. In short, is it fair to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for people who are literally looking and saying, I'm in my 50s and I am going to be living or dying my retirement based on my beautiful McMansion that I want to sell and live off the savings, you would say that's probably going to be okay. Not ideal, but that you're probably going to get your money back and be able to live off that.
Yeah, I'd say, look at your house as an asset, just as you look at a stock or a bond or a crypto asset as an asset, and figure out how comfortable you are. This is maybe a simple or maybe too aggressive of a way of looking at things, but, look at your home's value minus out your mortgage, and that equity is your asset. How much do you think that will grow over the next 10, 20, 30 years? If the number is 2 to 3%, you can make more in the stock market, and maybe your home holds its value. Global financial crisis was a black swan event. Unless that happens again, I think your home's value should be a very steady grower, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. And from a diversification perspective, I think you should also make sure, you should have an allocation to other assets that could grow even more. Again, there's all sorts of financial planning, is that enough, the growth of the home? But I think that's a good way to look at it as far as it becoming a piece of the puzzle as opposed to the entire thing. And it's important to have a mix of assets, and real estate's just one of them.
Yep. I think that's awesome. Hey, Tim, we really appreciate letting us pick your brain as it relates to financial investment strategies and thoughts. And of course, none of this is just your opinion, right? We're not taking anything here as law, but I think this is great. And what I'd like to do is we're going to go to break. When we come back, one of the things we haven't really talked as much about is kind of understanding. I know you're an Eagles fan. I know You're a golfer. There's a lot of these things that we haven't dug into. So I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to have some fun and talk about some of that stuff.
Awesome. Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
If you're all the way through your last binged podcast and looking for something new, then Foundation Radio has you covered. Interviews, politics, beer drinking, pro wrestling, Dungeons and Dragons, we have something for everyone. Stream the new episodes every Tuesday wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find all of our archive at foundationradio.net. You can also follow us on Instagram at foundation_radio. Foundation Radio, something for everyone.
Hey listeners, it's Ron here. I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about our newly launched website, twostuds.com. That's TWOSTUDDS.com. There you'll find blog entries and postings about all of our recent episodes, and you'll also be able to see how to get in touch with us and all sorts of other information about your favorite hosts, Ron and Alex Studd. We hope you'll check it out.
And welcome back to Between Two Studs. We just spent the last 40 minutes or so talking with Tim all about the financial world. I kind of want to get to know Tim a little bit better, even though I already know him. But there's so much that's going on in your world that I think we should dig into and talk about a little bit. The one piece that's kind of quasi your work, I guess this is a good transition question, right? Because it's half related to finance, but half related to like other fun stuff, is I know and I've seen you being interviewed and being quoted on CNBC and Reuters and Yahoo Finance and other publications. What is that like? Are you when you're preparing to be on TV? Do they I don't even know. Do they send you makeup and lighting? What's going on?
Yeah, so it's changed a lot within the last year, which was why I thought your interview with Matt Toll was really interesting, because I think I'm fascinated to learn about how people's jobs have changed throughout COVID. One of mine has been how I interact with the media. And so, in particular with TV, every time I used to go on, I would have to drive from my office or my home in the center city of Philadelphia, because there's few, suburb, satellite broadcasting studios. And I would, it takes me time to get into the city, time to park, time to walk up, time to wait. You have a minute to 2 minute interview, and then you do the whole thing in reverse. And so I've loved that, I guess throughout COVID, that, with so many guests being at home and not in a studio like that, we all been really cool about really shitty interview quality, right? So it's been awesome. I haven't had to make that commute, I guess. As far as makeup is concerned, ultimately I don't do makeup when I typically go into, Philadelphia for just a satellite spot. But when I'm actually in person, I do a media tour in New York. One time I had, I guess you do basically a sprint all day long. It's 6-8 hours. You get on the train, you get up there, and then they just basically set up interviews for you all day. And so you basically say the same thing over and over again, and nothing has really a lot of depth. And so I guess one of my concerns and frustrations with it is, and why I think podcasts are so awesome, is you actually get to dive deeper into questions and peel back the layer, as opposed to what is typically a minute to a minute and a half interview. And you're trying to talk your book and just, let the world know how you feel about something in a very surface level. And then that's it. You go home. It's cool to be on TV and everything, and I guess find that people like to hear what you have to say. But, that's why I like doing podcasts, as well as there's a really small radio station up where our parent company is. And I go on that for an hour and a half, I think, a couple times a year. It's the best interview I have the entire year, to be honest, because the guy's really prepared for it. And so
until this one.
Until this one. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, so I get up there, I get my makeup at the first place. So I go up to Fox Business in New York, and they take me to the waiting room, and they go, all right, you can go to makeup. And I said, nah, I'm good. I just had makeup done. And they're like, I think you do. I think you need to go get makeup done. And I was like, all right, so we're doing this. Hook me up again.
So you got makeup twice.
I didn't even know that you needed it that many times.
You got it caked on really thick, huh?
Absolutely. So if you see me earlier in that day, that's makeup 1. If you see me later in that day, it's makeup 2.
I got to look it up, because you just look like a clown.
Nah, it wasn't bad. No, not at all. But it was just I guess it was my first exposure to wearing makeup in general. So it was a lot of fun. We've got a great PR firm that really helps us out in spreading, sort of opportunities for us that I think make a lot of sense with our firm. But it's funny going to a studio and going through that drive. You sit in a little room, you look at they give you the option. You can look at your fat face because the camera definitely adds 10 pounds, or you can look at a black screen, take your pick, and then you go home. So it's pretty unglamorous.
Well, it's interesting because you're the second or third person that has mentioned, and maybe you're just giving us compliments because we're running a podcast, but you're the second or third person that has told Ron and I that in the world that we're in now, and you have such a short amount of time in most traditional media to communicate your thought, and of course you're also trying to appeal to a large audience, and they want to appeal to a large audience, and so it's like, how can you summarize this? And I don't mean to be negative when I say this, but appeal to the lowest common denominator. And so all of a sudden, when you can be on a podcast with Joe Rogan for 3 hours, it's like, whoa, now we can really get into the meat of this.
Nothing gets diluted. And that's exactly what happens with mainstream media. And it's why that I really like to, consume podcasts. I think it's why Twitter Spaces is going to work fabulously well. Not a company I own or recommend, but I think Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse are two exciting platforms, much like podcasts, where it's a conversation more so than anything. So, it was funny when I was listening. I just have to say and ask you guys a question. I was listening to the interview with Matt Toll, found it really fascinating because I got to, see the other side of the business that I'm talking about right now. And, when I consume media, it's Twitter, as I mentioned, it's Bloomberg. If I'm feeling a little carefree and fun, I'll watch CNBC, but I read the Journal every day and I listen to the podcast medium. But anyway, so he was talking about like building news teams. And I was like thinking, like, how many meteorologists are like sort of out on the street looking for a job? Like, it kind of like struck me like there's probably not a lot of meteorologist job growth. It's basically replaced through retirement. Like, are there a bunch of people, meteorologists generally aren't that great at predicting the weather anyway. So how do you lose a job when that's sort of the bar? So anyway, not to disparage anybody here. I love watching the weather, and I follow a ton of meteorologists on Twitter that I think are really thoughtful, but it just was like, it really interesting to me. I've never really met anybody that's really gotten into meteorology as well, to make it a career.
I know that we're kind of cutting over into a little bit of other territory, especially we talked a little bit between the episodes and during break about the Buffalo Bills, but we're not going to go to the Bills today. We're going to talk about the other team that Alex and I are fans of. That's a great part. You got your AFC.
To the extent, let's be clear for the record, we are Bills fans, and then there's a mile of dirt, and then there's Eagles.
Wow. I wasn't going to go that far, but I mean, I like to see it as I've got my AFC team and I got my NFC team.
No, I disagree. But we are talking with an Eagles fan tonight.
Right. All right. So Chubb, we got to talk what happened this past year. I mean, there's a lot of news that's come out about what's going on with Wentz. And I know that,
you fired your coach that won a Super Bowl 3 years ago.
Right. So you fired him and now you're trading Wentz. And, I guess the question is what happened? And then not only what happened, but, as an Eagles fan, are you cheering or are you sad or where's your head at with that? And then I apologize, I'm dumping a ton on you, but with Wentz, what's going to happen to him with Frank Reich?
Yeah.
And with that, I'll let you go.
Yeah, no. So I think like a lot of things, and maybe, you're catching a theme with how I answer questions. Like, a lot of times it's not an if or it's not a this or that, it's an and so I don't think we should have traded Peterson or traded Wentz and let go of Peterson, and I think we should have gotten rid of Howie Roseman, but at the same time I think Jalen Hurts is going to be a great NFL quarterback. And so I think it all comes back to incentives. I don't think there's many people ever that have been a successful coach and GM. And I think too many coaches have this, ego about themselves that they should be both. In the same way, I think that not many coaches can be the offensive coordinator and the head coach. So,
Agreed.
I mean, did I think Doug Peterson, is he a good coach? Yes. Did he need an offensive coordinator for diversity of thought? I mean, what we talked about during episode 14 and how I run my team? Absolutely. Like, I don't know if Frank Reich was everything, but I think he was something. and it helped create balance within the play calling system. And I don't think like Chip Kelly, I don't think he was a bad coach. And I know I'll probably get laughed at for that, but I also don't think he should have been the GM. So ultimately, I think Wentz has a lot of success with Frank Reich. I don't know who Frank Reich replaced when we took his offensive coordinator, but I think as long as he hires somebody and has some balance, they'll have a successful, partnership together.
Knowing what we know now in 2021, Peterson gone, Wentz gone, after the Super Bowl where they won, and Foles was Super Bowl MVP, in hindsight, should the Eagles have put their weight around Foles?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, especially, I guess at that point in time, it's hard because I think Wentz would have won MVP even if we would have gone to the first or second round of playoffs with how well he performed that year. That year, I've never called WIP, the Philadelphia Sports Talk radio station, before, but I had a long drive by myself Labor Day weekend that year. And so I guess it was 2016. And I called WIP and they were talking about how excited everybody was before the season started. And I said, I felt like Howie Roseman was basically like a repeat of Ed Snyder and Bobby Clark, and how they kept buying a lot of expensive players late in their career. And so I watched guys like Chris Long and others, who ultimately had a ton of success that season because of the depth that they had a defensive line. But I think I watched what I did. I said, we'll never win a Super Bowl with Howie Roseman as GM because we keep buying these veteran players at expensive prices. I turned out to be wrong. They struck, gold that year. And I've never talked to WIP again. But ultimately, I think it comes back to the GM. I think we sort of struck lightning there. I think if you had a different GM, you had Carson Wentz or Nick Foles and some maybe draft picks if you didn't have Wentz, plus Doug Peterson, I think we could go on and again, I'm a biased Eagles fan. I think we would be a much more successful team than we will be next season.
Yeah. I think what's hard for Ron and I know it's not fair to compare the city of Buffalo to the city of Philadelphia, right? It's apples and oranges. Totally get that. But I'm telling you right now, if Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills ever won the Bills Super Bowl, we're putting up a statue, and he is guaranteed to be the coach for the next 10 years. He could go 0-16 for the next 10 years, and he'd still be the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. You guys got rid of your coach 3 years after he won the Super Bowl.
Hey, I didn't want Peterson to leave, and I didn't want Chip Kelly to leave. So what do I know?
Oh, well, it's funny. On the topic of sports, Tim, if I were to know, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, if there's one guy I know who is quite the sports gambler, and I'm not talking money. I'm not saying how much money you gamble or don't gamble, but you definitely like to throw a little bit out there with different sports. And I feel like it's always with totally obscure. It's like college football, and then it's golf, and then it's like there's no way, Tim, that you know this much about every single sport. There's no way you know more than Vegas. So yeah, when you're placing a bet, I mean, just for the general population like myself, what are you actually looking at?
I think it's a couple things. One is I think I'm not an economist, but I've got a brain that was trained on economics, and so ultimately things go back to incentives, and I'll get back to that in a second. But I think one of the big things, and my wife always says this, and it's really a negative in her mind, but a positive in mine, I think, is I have a very addictive personality, and I'm high risk. And so addictive personality, I agree with. I'm either all in or all out. There's no in between, and anything less than what I think is appropriate amount of time spent on something is not going to make me feel good about myself. It's sort of like, Ron, you were talking about the seltzers a couple episodes ago. I used to drink like 4 to 6 cases of Coke Zero a week in college.
Right up until your 3rd or 4th heart attack?
No, I never had the heart attack. It was all the aspartame. I met Amber and she was like, yo, the soda's got to stop, dude. And I'm like, all right. Now I drink that much of seltzer water, the non-calorie seltzer water every single week. So again, addictive personality, all in or all out. Second thing is high risk. And I don't necessarily view it as high risk because I think I have edge and I bet on myself, and I think I can try to quantify some principles related to my strategy. So essentially, it comes back to numbers. I use the Action app to check across multiple sports books. But for me, it's like, where does the incentive come in? For the NFL and the NBA, which are two of the three sports I bet on, I'm always betting for the losing team to come back because they need it for the ratings. The dollars are bigger, and ultimately, good teams put their bad players in the second half, and the bad team in losing either backdoor covers the spread or covers the live spread when there's an absolute blowout happening. So I love live betting on NFL and NBA, and I love live betting on college football, but for the opposite reason, because rankings matter, in college football, and the more you blow out teams matter. And so if I watch a team in the first quarter or second quarter just totally blowing out their competition, I'll live bet the line and bet that Alabama or Oklahoma or one of these great teams in top 5 just continue laying it on for the whole game. So that's my whole strategy. It comes back to incentives and also, how I think I might have an edge. And of course, there's all sorts of math behind some of this sort of stuff. But anyway, I love gambling on sports.
I know you do, and it's impressive. So I appreciate you giving us sort of the insight on that, because I was like, I've seen you do it, and I'm like, there's no way you follow these teams to this level. But I understand your high level explanation makes sense. The one last question about sports, it's not about gambling at all, but you talked about this actually in the last episode. You briefly talked about your interest in golf, and I really wanted you to kind of talk a little bit more about it. And what I mean by it is specifically about country club culture, because Ron and I grew up in a very small town America, and our parents were involved with the country club. They had just the swimming pool access, right? It was we weren't golfers, but we were part of the swimming pool program, right? They had a specific package for that. And that included the dining hall, right, the dinner and all that, that we had to spend X amount of dollars in per year or whatever. But Ron and I don't want to quote you, Ron, I don't want to take you out of context, but Ron and I always felt that there was a little bit of pretentiousness that existed with country clubs. And I think part of the reason I've never gotten into golf myself is not so much that I don't enjoy the sport. I mean, to me, hanging outside, drinking beer, smoking a cigar, that sounds awesome, right? Everything about that sounds awesome. But I've always just had this like hoity-toity, like we're better than everyone else thought around country clubs. And I hope that's changing. I hope that's going away. Or maybe Ron and I just had a bad experience in our little town in one little part of the world. But I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, and I definitely still think it exists. I mean, one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie of all time, is Caddyshack. And it's because of the judge and just like the total asshole that he plays within the movie and how stereotypical that is. I mean, my wife and I belong to a club. I show up in my car blasting rap music. I jump out of the car in like a floral shirt with tie-dye shoes. And I go along hole 1 walking because everybody else rides carts, walking because I enjoy the design of the course and I want to appreciate the time I have outside, listening to rap music on my bag. So like I don't have any friends at the club. I bring some of my friends to go play with me, but there's not enough me's out there. And I think it comes back to just demographics and like the millennial generation coming into their peak earning years. As they start spending money and enjoy golf the way I do, I think ultimately country club, sort of culture changes because I can appreciate an organization that, ultimately has some sort of fraternal aspect to it, some history aspect to it, ultimately can appreciate, the game and physical activity and the mental health that it brings. But, I still think it very much exists. It's not until really our generation, I think, starts making the money or at least making the time and investment into golf in the way that, I think it's important to change that culture because, the food still sucks. We don't want to hang out with anybody there, but it's economical for me to play golf and my wife likes to go to the pool. So.
No, and I appreciate the response because, again, I love everything about golf except what comes with golf. And again, I have a very limited background, so keep that in mind. But in my mind, it's like the last thing I want to do is go to a country club and sniff each other's assholes. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I go to play golf and walk and be outside and listen to music and play a lot because it's close to my house, and the pool's nice too. But I'm not making friends at the country club.
I like everything about the way you described it, especially when you get out of the car, because I could just see a lot of people at the club just kind of taking a bit of an eye to you and just kind of being like, oh boy, here's this guy. Hopefully you don't see that, but I think to Alex's point, I don't know. There is some element of I share the same sentiment. And it's unfortunate because I think that there is a lot of great things that can come from a country club. But I think that there is also a certain level of pretentiousness that does also come with that.
For sure.
And it's unfortunate.
But
it'll reinvent itself.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. As the millennial generation becomes the significant breadwinner, you have to adapt to that. And I don't think that's what the millennial generation is interested in. I don't think they care as much about the pomp and circumstance that previous generations may have. And I don't say that to belittle previous generations. I just think priorities have shifted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's inclusiveness, right? I mean, like, there's not a lot of, people of color at the club. I mean, it was something my wife asked when we joined, like, how diverse is your membership base? And it's not. And then some of that's a function of the environment, but some of that's a function of golf not being something that is affordable for a lot of people. And when it's thought of as this expensive and time consuming and have to do 18 holes and there's not enough courses, and do you have any courses are in inner cities across this country? Almost
not many at all.
Not a lot, but there's at least some, and a lot of them are public. And golf could be this outlet as a sport, I think, for so many urban communities. But because of how expensive it is in the suburbs, it's not. And because of how improperly they're maintained within the inner cities, it's just not a great experience. And so that's what I'm hoping changes. And I think Tiger Woods made a lot of progress to that extent, and some of the other golfers that are people of color, but we still have a long way to go.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know that you're quite the fan of beer. Given your knowledge, I'd love to kind of hear about your Mount Rushmore of beer. So give me your top cheap national beer, give me your seasonal beer, give me your IPA, and then I want some wild card where I'm going to go out, I'm going to look for this magic beer that you're talking about, and I'm going to be completely blown out of my mind by how awesome it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah. So what was the first one? Cheap national beer?
Cheap national.
Okay. Right. So I guess I have to go. There's really two. I'll give you my first one and the reasons why. If I don't know what I want to drink when I go to a bar or like out to dinner, usually it's at a bar. I show up at a bar and I go up to the bartender and I'm like, I don't know if I feel like a cocktail. I don't know if I feel like a glass of wine. I don't know if I want like a craft beer. Like, what kind of night's it going to be? I always order a Bud Heavy. Budweiser every single time.
Bud Heavy?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not Bud Light.
Wow.
Bud Heavy. And just sets like the mood, like which direction am I going to go? It gives me some time to think about that next decision. It's
funny because Tim, you and I went to a lot of the same parties in college, and you just don't see Bud Heavy that often. And it's funny, it was about a couple years ago that I finally went to St. Louis and I did the whole tour. And actually St. Louis is a cool little town. And I did the whole Budweiser tour and I had Budweiser, Bud Heavy. And I was actually like, you're going to laugh at me, but I was like, oh, this is not a terrible.
This is the Rid.
This is
the OG.
This is not a terrible beer. Like I always shit on the crappy national beers, but I was, I'm used to drinking Bud Light and comparing it to Coors Light and comparing it to Miller Lite. Budweiser, known as Bud Heavy, is actually I can see why you enjoy it.
One and done. It's very rare that I go multiple Bud Heavies. Now, I would say if I'm going to decide that I'm going to go with beer that night, it's Bud Lights. For obviously the physique, but Bud Heavies is always the first one. Little treat, little nice way to start out the night and let you decide with what direction you like to go.
Now, I think this is fun to ask everybody. I know, Ron, you asked this at Tim, but I will answer that question too. My cheap national beer, it's a cheap international beer, but Labatt's Blue.
Ooh.
That
Some LBs.
LBs. That's my go-to cheap international national beer. What about you, Ron?
I'm thinking Yingling, right?
Yingling, yeah.
I mean, Yingling's
Great
a
choice.
solid. Now, granted, we've all kind of certainly drank a lot around the Pennsylvania area, but Yingling is a really good gateway beer where there's nothing really you don't like about it. It tastes good. And it's just solid.
Yingling was the first beer that I enjoyed. I remember distinctly it was the first beer that I actually took a sip of it, and I said, I don't actually hate this. And I mean, beer is obviously an acquired taste.
Right.
But I remember Yingling was actually like, I remember enjoying it. All the other beers I ever had when I was at that age, it was like, oh, yeah, this is great. But deep down, it was just like, I'm just glad because I'm getting drunk. But I actually hate this. Yingling was the first beer that I actually enjoyed the taste of. So I respect that. Moving to the second round of the Mount Rushmore metaphor.
Seasonals.
A seasonal beer.
All right. So I'm not a huge seasonal fan. I guess I change my beer by the season as it is. As far as what I drink in the winter, it might be a little bit different from what I drink in the summer and spring. But I have to say, a good Oktoberfest. I think the local brewery around here, Levante, has a great one they call the Drachenstadt.
I'm glad you brought them up because that's a great Westchester beer.
Oh yeah,
Levante.
yeah.
Ron, I know you've not had it. We will get you some next time you're in the Delaware, Philadelphia area. It's a great beer.
Yeah, I think Oktoberfest is solid. They made a beer a couple years ago. I remember it must have been like probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they actually just sort of re-released it. They called it the Irish Portato, and it was like an Irish potato, which I think is more of a Philly thing. I thought it was more national, but what do I know? But it was basically an Irish potato. It was coconut, it was chocolate, it was a little cinnamon. It was really a tasty beer, and they actually just re-released it. So I'd say Oktoberfest, but if I'm drinking like 2 or 3 of them, but the Irish Portato back in the day was really good. Now they've got another one just came out this year that's similar.
So for me, I'm an Oktoberfest guy as well, but I don't want to steal your answer. So once a year, literally one time, I don't want a 6-pack of it. I want one. Southern Tier pumpkin.
Oh yeah,
I want one of them, and it's delicious. I enjoy every sip of it, but I have my one, and then I go, yeah, I'm done. I don't need it anymore.
That's a good one. It's like the Wawa Gobbler sandwich.
Yeah,
like Thanksgiving in a sandwich. You have one, you're like, that's it. Maybe a year,
good.
maybe a 2.
Yeah. What about you, Ron?
I think I'm gonna have to switch seasons on y'all. I'm going to go for Troegs Mad Elf for winter.
Oh, yeah. Then that hits you hard, though. You got to be careful with those.
That is the perfect beer when you're snowed in and you have nowhere to go. My favorite pairing with it, judge me as you may, horrible Kung Fu movie. You drink some of that, enjoy some horrible Kung Fu movie, you're in your heaven. You're not going anywhere. You're good.
Kung Fu? Really?
Yes. You have to watch a really bad Kung Fu with it, and you're good.
There you go. I can't argue with that.
I'll have to try it. I think I've got some Mad Elf downstairs that I've had from a couple Christmases ago.
Oh,
I don't know
you
how good
aged
it is.
That's good.
It's even better.
I guarantee you it's gotten even better.
Well, again, I didn't age it on purpose. It was that I could only have one.
Yeah,
and then I'm done.
So, yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing as the pumpkin.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on. I know it's like the hipster. Everyone makes it now. Everyone, your mama makes it. But there's got to be an IPA that sticks out in your mind that you enjoy.
Yeah, I think with IPAs comes back to like sort of like the memories you hear or the sounds you hear and the memories that you have about certain IPAs. At least that's the way for me. And maybe that's like maybe the most hipster beer nerd thing I've ever said. But I went to Maine Beer Company a couple years ago, loved it, and I think lunch and dinner, in particular dinner, were probably the 2 most favorite IPAs that I've had that I could drink again and again and again. And really I just think so balanced. Cloudy and Cumbersome with Levante is one for sure that I love. It was at our wedding. People raved about it. When we got married, craft beer was like very much on the rise. And so we introduced a lot of people to craft beer during our wedding, which was kind of cool. And Cloudy was the most favorite of everybody.
That's a great beer.
Yeah, it's just a solid, hazy IPA that, gets the job done. So
yeah. Well, for me, there's the fine line between I love hops. I love the taste of an IPA. But there's also this like where you get slapped in the face, right? And it's just like I don't taste anything except just like this bitter. Right? So you got to find the fine line. I would say for me, the IPA that I really enjoy on seldom occasion, it's a toss up. I can't pick between one, so I'm going to give you two. One is Sierra Nevada Torpedo. I think it's a great beer. Really enjoy it. The other is I really love Dogfish Head 90 Minute. I think 120 is this might crucify me and I might lose my Delaware license for this. I think it's overrated. I think 120 is overrated. I think 60 is good, but I think 90 is even better. So 90 Minute, Dogfish, and Sierra Nevada Torpedo. Those are my two. Ron, what about you?
All right, so I'm with you. I think IPAs, I've kind of gotten IPA'd out, but I've had a few that have been amazing. The one that I can think of that really kind of would take the cake for me is Yakima Glory by Victory Brewing, which that is solid. I had that.
Everything by Victory is good.
Right. It's a black Cascadian dark ale, and it's just, I mean, it kind of threw me off when they were like, yeah, that's an IPA. And I'm like, no, that doesn't look like an IPA. And it's like, no, it is. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. So yeah, that's my IPA. All right. So Chubb, back to you. Tell us your wild card.
Yeah. So, I guess sours probably are my wild card. I really like sours, for the reasons when I'm interested in like having, a drink with dinner, or I think like especially in the summertime, a lot of times I'm really interested in having a sour in the same sort of mood I'm in when I want to have a glass of wine, especially white wine. And so I oftentimes turn to, a cider, and there's a really good friend of mine who's creating, Chester County Cidery, which I think is going to be really exciting. Really some nice dry ciders, not that like super sweet stuff that you would expect. So I think the most maybe unusual is some of the hop ciders. I really like the hop ciders, but I also really like a lot of sours. And Hudson Valley Brewery makes some great sours, but I'd say Chester County on the cider side, on sours, and Chester County on the cider side is my go-to on the wild side.
I like that. I've had some really mixed opinions about sour beers. I've had some good ones, but I've also had some sour beers that I felt like I was drinking the Atlantic Ocean. And there's a fine line for me anyway. There's a fine line. If I had to pick a wild card beer, I think that the first international beer, and by international beer, I mean beyond just the U.S. and Canada. The first international beer I really ever fell in love with, it was actually Ron introduced me to it. Paulaner Dunkelweizen, right? Not the Hefeweizen, not the light wheat, but the wheat. I think that's a fantastic beer. It's very enjoyable and is my favorite German beer. My favorite European beer. So with the debatable argument, I also am a huge Guinness guy. Guinness, fresh, right out of the keg, is right up there as well. But for this round of Mount Rushmore, I'm going to go with Paulaner.
The Dunkels, it's the vanilla, the banana, and the cloves.
Yes.
I mean that. Like Hefeweizens, it's just the bananas and the cloves. With a Dunkel, you get the vanilla.
You're totally right about that.
Yeah.
So
that's a good one.
I'm a huge fan, and Ron introduced me to Paulaner. What about yourself, Ron?
We're going for wild cards. I got to say, since I've moved to Atlanta, I've been surprised. There's a brewery down here called Sweetwater, and Sweetwater has
Sweetwater 420.
Yes. So they've got their G13 is really good. It is very dank. You open a bottle of that and it's like, whoo. But I really like in terms of a summer.
When you say dank, you're like, I just came out of a Marley concert, huh?
Right. I mean, if you've had it or if you smelled it, it definitely has that. It has a smell, but they've got a really nice. I like to think of it as it's a year round, but it's a nice kind of lighter beer. It's their 420 strain Mango Kush, and it tastes good. It smells good. It's really light. It's just solid. And it's something where I'm really happy that I kind of discovered it. So it's kind of a nice little wild card to throw in there. But
Yeah, that's a good one, Ron. They actually just were acquired, and it was by a Canadian cannabis company. And they want to use the 420 brand equity to expand on, hopefully, or eventually, I should say, cannabis beverages in the United States.
wow.
Wow. That's actually very interesting. It's very interesting. Well, there you go. There you have it. Hey, so kind of in the same vein, but a little different. Tim, this is a super important. This might be the most important question of both episode 14 and 15. I saw recently Barstool is doing a list of the best bars in the country, right? They're doing it's a March Madness, right? Same exact like 1 through 16 seed. And they literally have Westchester's Jake's Bar is a 1 seed in the nation, going up against the best college bars from UCLA, Texas A&M. I mean, it's literally like it's funny, it's hilarious, and I'm a Westchester grad, but it's like, and you are too. But it's like you have these universities that are all like Division I, everyone knows Auburn, everyone knows Notre Dame, and then Westchester, number 1 seed, Jake's Bar. Can you, for the uninitiated, just in your own words, just quickly describe the majesty that is Jake's Bar?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was funny because I was actually telling this story to somebody recently who went to school in, down in North Carolina in the Belt. And they're like, what's up with Jake's? Like, what's the story there? And I said, you have this bar on a corner next to a pizza shop that has a shuffleboard table, and getting better, they don't serve food. And if you and your buddy sort of hold hands and like reach across, the entirety of the bar, if one of you guys touches the bar on one hand and the other person is holding that person's hand and touches the bar on the other hand, you're gonna either hit the half the way up the shuffleboard table or the wall. Like, that's how wide the freaking bar is. And so that, combined with a lot of neon, no food.
There are no lights. There are no lights actually at Jake's Bar. It's all neon.
All neon. You can smoke because there's no food, which is, I guess a benefit if you like a cigar every now and again, or, don't mind cigarette smoke. The bathroom is unspeakable. There's a jukebox. And if you stay long enough, they make you put the chairs on the table like your staff, and it's time, like closing time's coming on. So that's Jake's Bar in a nutshell.
Wait. How much are beers?
$1.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I've never been to this magical place, but for the uninitiated, for our listeners who are not from this magical geographical place in the world, here's what I know. And I will let Chubb and Alex correct me where I'm wrong. Number one, the beer is very, very cheap, right? So if you're a college student, you're looking for great beer, there is no better place to go, especially in Westchester, than Jake's. Number two, what's also mystical about this place is the shirts. The shirts that you get, because here's the crazy part. Alex has told me multiple times of this, and it's crazy because, you know what, now that I'm aware of this, it's kind of like one of those hidden tricks that you can't unsee. You will look out across the rest of the world, and you will see somebody wearing one of these dark blue Jake's Bar shirts. And guess what? You will know that they have been to that wonderful place in Westchester. And Alex was out in Japan, of all places, and he was wearing his Jake's Bar shirt. And guess what? Another Westchester graduate happened to find Alex because he was wearing that same wonderful shirt.
So Ron, you're spot on with everything you just said. What Jake's is absolutely brilliant about is they realized years ago, and I don't understand why other businesses haven't. You're not a t-shirt business. You shouldn't be trying to make money on the t-shirt. It's literally sell it at cost, and it's free advertising. I don't understand for the life of me. I will frequently go to a bar or a restaurant and say, hey, this is a lot of fun. How much is a shirt? And they go, $25. Why would I pay $25 for a shirt when I'm supporting you? I'm promoting your brand. Sell it to me at cost, and I will give you all the free publicity you want. I don't understand it. So and Tim will vouch for this. When you are a Westchester University student and you're in your senior year, they're $3 t-shirts or 3 for $10. Right?
Yeah, because you get a volume discount at 3.
Wait,
they're $4
$3 t-shirt or 3 for $10. That seems like
they're $4 t-shirts or 3 for $10. You get the extra. That's where you make.
Okay.
That's where the volume discount comes in.
There you go.
But the point is this: is like I remember my entire senior year of college, and Tim, I'm sure, can vouch for this. By the time you're 21, you walk into your senior year of classes. There's a class of 30 students. At least 3 or 4 students are always wearing a Jake's Bar shirt. Always. Inevitably, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's the epitome of Westchester in so many ways because it's so much of a really diverse, I think, group of people there at any one time. You have these like really small segments of friends that are all there from it could be a bunch of accounting and finance, people to pre-med and everything in between, and everyone's at Jake's Bar. And the other cool part is it's gritty. And when I hear and I hire people from Westchester, what everybody keeps saying is Westchester is gritty. People come out of their schooling there more ready to hit the ground running and dealing with the corporate grind. It's like they all had jobs when they were in school. They all had jobs growing up. They didn't come from this sort of like, trust fund mentality, which I know is the case between both of us. And as a result, they need to pay off their student loans. They need to work really hard and be thoughtful and care about their people that they're working with. And so, I'm always, excited about hiring Westchester grad for that reason. And I think the epitome is Jake's Bar because it's gritty, it's unpretentious, but man, it gets the job done.
So what we need to find, Tim, is we need to find a way to incorporate the best elements of Jake's and the best elements of country clubs and combine them together.
It would work. I could see it.
It's an old school dive bar. That's what it is.
Right.
And I love my dad. I love my dad to death. And if he's listening to this episode, I remember the first time I took my dad and we get in, and you're going to laugh at this, Tim. We get in and immediately he goes, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? I go, Dad, you're in the wrong bar if you think they have a Wi-Fi. This is a gritty bar.
Yeah.
You're lucky to have signal.
Oh yeah. It's one of those places where you don't expect to close the place down, but you do.
Yeah.
And it's because of the good conversations you have, because you're not there for the ambiance. You're there to hang out with a bunch of people, have a $5 pitcher of beer, and maybe play some shuffleboard.
Tim, I know we have taken up a lot of your time. We've had to break up this conversation into 2 episodes, but we are curious, kind of wrapping this episode up. What have you been doing recently in your free time with COVID? What are you excited to be doing once life returns to normal? Like, talk to us a little bit about just kind of what's going on.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm working through right now is like, what do I want to leave in my pre-COVID life, and what do I want to maintain from my COVID life? And I played a lot of golf last year, which was really great. I read like I normally do, Twitter, is my sugar, and books are my protein. I really, enjoyed listening to music, honestly, within the last 12 months. Like Ron was talking about, as far as, his refrigerator for his seltzer waters, I splurged on some noise canceling headphones. And I've rediscovered and discovered music genres and artists that I just really never had much exposure to in the past. So Not much has changed. More golf, same reading, but I've loved listening to music to wind down at the end of the day. And, I've really enjoyed, some interesting stuff that, is outside of my normal, listening pattern.
Awesome response. Yeah, I think we're all kind of in that same place. And I really liked your idea of taking some of the great things that have come from COVID about who you are and some of the pre-COVID things and kind of identifying that that's partly who we all are now. With that, I think we're going to have to wrap up this episode. But Chubb, it's been a pleasure having you on. You are the first guest we've ever had that has taken us through 2 full episodes.
Well, Ron, I was going to ask, does this mean he's technically a repeat episode?
I don't know.
Like, is he our first guest that's been on, we brought back, but I guess we didn't, right? This was all recorded on the same night.
Right. He's just part 2.
But you did not say 15. You said 14B.
No, well, I did at the beginning, but we changed our mind on that.
We're going to make you 15 as well. So you're 14 and 15.
You are episode 14 in and of itself, and then you're episode 15 in and of itself.
I was going to say, if you want to reserve, recurring guests for somebody else, by all means do so. But
it's very kind of you. But you know what? This has been great. I think we've touched on a lot of great topics, and I think our audience is going to love it. So thank you so much. This has been a sincere pleasure, and I'm really happy to have met you.
And I think what's been really nice about this is we were really able to cover a lot of topics. Yes, we were here when you combine both episodes 2 hours or so, but I feel like we were really able to talk about a lot of things, right? What's going on in the world. So, Tim, we really appreciate you giving up a Friday night to record this with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. And sincerely, I think that's the beauty of the medium. And I hope you keep it up. I'm looking forward to listening to more.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, we'll wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for listening.